Hi, my name is Sean Connor Anderson, and welcome to episode 3 of A Righteous Journey. So far, we've explored how those closest to the pain can often be those closest to the solution, and how we can come alongside returning citizens to physically manifest the healing and restorative work God has already done in their spirit. Great stuff, right? Today, we'll be taking a different route and listening in as Desmond and Neil share the story of the Florida Rights Restoration Coalition, from struggle to strategy to success, and how God inspired them every step of the way. But first, let's look at the terms we'll be discussing in this episode. A lot of times, when it comes to things like voter disenfranchisement, issues of such gravity and impact, tales of victory seem few and far between. That's why it's important to hear stories like Desmond's and Neil's, stories where things don't go as planned, but work out just the way they were supposed to in order to bring about the reconciliation and restoration that God desires. Let's listen in. What is it Amendment 4, and what did it accomplish?
Amendment 4 ultimately ended a 150-year lifetime ban on voting for people with past convictions. At the end of the day, it was in the Florida Constitution that you lose your rights to vote if you get a felony conviction, and it was created in the 1860s. And it was geared primarily towards stopping newly freed Black people from being able to vote. And we saw this cancer of hatred start in that moment. And by the time we got to 2018 in Florida with Amendment 4, that cancer had grown to a point where it had infected the entire community. Every segment of society was impacted by this. In fact, people looked more like me than Desmond if you looked at the numbers in terms of who was impacted by this lifetime ban on voting. And so ultimately what Amendment 4 did was tear down the walls to that lifetime ban and allow people the ability to vote again. And it impacted 1.4 million people. It was the largest expansion, the civil rights expansion of voting in our state's history in a generation. And it was led by people who had been through something, like how biblical is that?
Yeah. Well, let me be clear on this, right? Florida at the time, Florida was one of only 4 states in this country that implemented a lifetime ban. And what that means is anyone convicted of any felony offense would lose their civil rights for the rest of their life, which means they can't vote, they lose the ability to own a firearm, they lose the ability to run for office, serve on a jury. And then there were hundreds, if not thousands, of collateral consequences that was associated with the loss of civil rights. And so, for instance, many occupational licenses were unattainable if you did not have your civil rights. Another example, something I faced personally, in many areas, I could not rent or even own a home because I lost my civil rights, right? And so a person in Florida, the minute they were convicted of a felony, lost all of that for the rest of their lives. And Florida accounted for about at least a third, I believe, of all the people in the entire United States who could not vote. 1/4 of all the people in the country who could not vote lived in Florida, right? And so what we did was we had to find some type of way to break that stranglehold, because at the time, if you had any opportunity to get your rights restored, it was only through the mercy of the governor and his clemency board. And we felt that voting was too important, right? We believe that voting is like one of the most clearest indicator of citizenship that a person can have. And it's so sacred that it should never be left in the hands of politicians to decide whether or not a person can regain that right back. And that's what Amendment 4 sought to do, to take that power out of the hands of politicians and put it in the hands of people where it rightfully belongs.
So one of the things that I'm particularly curious about is many of the changes that would happen on a legislative level would happen at the state legislature, maybe in the court system. You guys chose more of a public referendum approach to kind of seeing that change happen. What inspired your use of that particular tool? Why go down that road as opposed to maybe lobbying in a more traditional sense?
That was the last resort. I know when we picked the ballot initiative, that was only after, we tried legislative action, right? We tried lobbying the clemency board, the governor and the clemency board. We tried lobbying our state legislature. That was not an issue that politicians wanted to handle, right?
They'd been talking about it for decades, right?
Yeah.
I mean, there was a lot of talk about it amongst politicians,
but they never really put it out there, right? And basically, a big part of that was this tough on crime rhetoric, right? And the reluctance for politicians to do something that may be interpreted as being soft on crime. And then the other half of that was that there was a natural assumption, right, that this issue was either a black issue or an issue that involved Democrats, right? And so it became a political issue, racial, political, right, and this narrative on tough on crime. And so when you think, because we heard that 1 out of 4 African-American men in Florida at the time could not vote because of a prior felony conviction. We also know that felon disenfranchisement saw its resurgence in the United States during the Reconstruction era, right, when it was applied to really diminish the political capital of the newly freed slaves. And so when you have all of that history, the racial piece, and then you have the political piece, because now people are thinking, well, man, if we let people with felony convictions vote, they're going to vote Democrat, right? Why do they automatically assume that? Because when they think of the criminal justice system, they think of African Americans, because we're so disproportionately impacted by criminal justice and over policing in Black and brown communities. And so it's very difficult for a politician to even entertain the notion of restoring voting rights or civil rights to individuals that's impacted, because you have all these counteracting forces, right, that's saying, do not touch that. That's a hot potato, right? And so we tried lobbying the legislature. We tried lobbying the clemency board. But what we seen was we had some success in around 2000 and I would say around 2007, 2008, where the previous governor, Governor Charlie Crist, who was a Republican at the time, instituted a policy that created the automatic restoration of civil rights for people who were convicted of less serious offenses, right? But what happened was when the new administration came in, the new governor was like, I don't like that policy. Matter of fact, I'm going to make it harder. Right. And so what we've seen was the undoing of all of the years of work and resources and blood, sweat, and tears that we put into this be undone simply by a signature on a piece of paper. Right. And so understanding that it was so fickle, we've seen it in other states, in Kentucky and in Iowa. You would see every 4 years there's a different policy depending on who the governor is. And people should not have to live their lives wondering what's going to be different if a new administration comes in. There should be some things that should be just constant, regardless of who's in power, right? And so understanding the fickleness of it and the arbitrary nature of deciding who gets to vote and not, the only other option was that we needed to place within the state constitution something that was affirmative, right, that could not be undone, right, unless they change the Constitution again. And so we came up with the ballot initiative.
I don't know about you, but as I listened to Desmond and Neil share the story, I couldn't help but think, what if they hadn't responded to God's call? What if they saw millions of people like themselves who were restricted from voting and decided the problem was just too big? What if they resigned to a life of civil inactivity? Thankfully, we don't have to worry about those what ifs, but I think it serves as a reminder to all of us that when God calls us to the ministry of reconciliation, there's no telling what kingdom work our efforts can bring about. As we move into discussion time, we're going to analyze the problem Desmond and Neil faced and then apply their frameworks in our own unique contexts. How can we take issues that seem similarly impassable, present them to the Lord, and collaborate with Him to bring about His new creation? How can we use the faith and hope and perseverance of Desmond's and Neil's story to fill the sails of our own?